Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. For those of y'all that know me, what's up? For those of y'all that don't, my name's Chris. I know how to read, allegedly. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. If you can't already tell, we are in the new room. We are in the new apartment. My roommate and I were finally able to move out, and we're here. It took a couple days, and I had to take a couple days off from filming as well as from reading. So I didn't get to read as much as I wanted to in September, but the main thing is I have a roof, I have a home, I can always read, but you got to take care of the priorities first. So I got 3 piles next to me right here, and we are going to be talking about 3 things today. First, we're going to be talking about the books that I am donating, that I am unhauling this month. Next, we're going to be talking about the books that I read, not just in September, but also in August, because I didn't do like an August wrap-up reading video. And then we're going to talk about the books that I'm going to be reading in October. Let's start with the unhauling pile first, because I don't want to spend too much time on those. I mean, we're unhauling them for a reason. First book up is probably the hardest one to get rid of, which is Superman, The Ultimate Guide to the Man of Steel by Scott Beatty. I love this book. I had it as a kid. Like, I'll put some B-roll here, but like the spine is falling apart. I read this book so much. We didn't have like a ton of money as a kid, so like I wasn't buying comic books like every issue or anything like that. But what I did like to do is I would get like encyclopedia of Superman. I have the Wolverine encyclopedia, I have a Halo encyclopedia. Like, I would read those books like cover to cover 2 or 3 times, and then I'd have a general idea of what was going on in the comics. And some of the pictures in this book are like burned into my memory. There's this picture talking about the birth of Superman that's in here. Some of the Doomsday stuff is crazy. There's a whole bunch of art from like a wide variety of Superman comics in here, and that was always really cool to see as like a visual person. So I kind of forgot that I had that book, and the only reason I realized it was because I kind of packed everything in a rush, and unpacking everything is kind of when I noticed which books I wanted to keep and which books I didn't. So now that I'm going to go through this little unhauling process, I really kind of want to make that like a monthly part of my reading wrap-ups. Like, I don't want to always hold on to books just for the sake of holding on to them. If I think that someone else can have like a better time with a book I didn't enjoy, or can experience a book for the first time that I've already read multiple times or even just once, I'd rather give that up and donate that or sell it or something like that, just so someone else can experience it, since I already have. So I hope some little kid who can't afford comic books can read that Superman book and enjoy Superman like I did. Next up, we got Crocodile Tears, Alex Rider by Anthony Horowitz, There's a chapter in this book where a character, like a side character, is going about their day and slowly realizing that someone has stolen their identity. Like, they try to go to the bank and withdraw money. They can't do that. They can't pay for food. They can't do this. They can't do that. And as the chapter goes on, this character is realizing like, yo, I'm broke. Like, if someone has stolen me, my identity. And that's honestly the only chapter I remember of this book, and it probably wasn't even that dramatic. But this is very much like, oh, a high school student who has to make it to PE, but is also like a world-class spy. But for now, we're trying to donate these to other people so other people can experience things. So Alex Rider, I hope you can entertain someone else as well. Similar to Alex Rider, Dark Life by Cat Falls. I think this was a book I had to read for like a summer reading project or something like that. I think this is a story about like a family that lives underwater in like an underwater compound and stuff. That's really all I remember of this book, but it was summer reading. I kept it this long, so I must have enjoyed it. But hopefully by donating this or putting it in a little library, I'm not sure yet, hopefully someone else can enjoy this book for the first time. Next up, we got Billionaire Branding, How Hip Hop's Cash Kings Built Their Empires by T. Brookshire Harris. This was a book that I had to use sort of as like required reading. I was going to say textbook, but it was more just required reading for one of my sports management classes. And there's like some decent information in here. Unfortunately, the main cover of this book features He Who Shall Not Be Named. I don't know if anyone's going to get anything out of this, but I don't need it. It's taking up space. So hopefully someone else can find a use for it. And the last book that I will be unhauling is this big chonker right here, Hindsight and All the Things I Can't See in Front of Me by Justin Timberlake. I don't even know how I got this book. Like, I'm not even that big of a JT fan myself. There's a lot of beautiful photography here, and if you really care about Justin Timberlake, both the singer, actor, songwriter, and as well as the person, I'm sure there's a lot of information you can find in here. And like I said, the photography is great. There's like a bunch of storytelling here about like his history and his come up and all that. I'm just not that big of a Justin Timberlake fan myself. Like, I respect his music. So hopefully I can make someone's day by donating that book, because I'm not going to be in ownership of it anymore. Next, we're going to move on to the books that I did read in September, and this is also going to include the books that I read in August. I was supposed to do an August wrap up, but life got a little hectic, so I ended up not making that video. So this is going to include books that were in my August TBR, which if you haven't seen, I'll have something pop up on screen so you can watch that. And it's also going to include my September TBR, which is also going to be on screen if you haven't seen that. So first book that I was supposed to read, I think I talked about this in the September TBR video, was Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I gave this book like 50 pages and then I said, I'm good. And everyone knows like the classic Tarzan story, right? Like parents get marooned on an island, they pass away right after he's born, and eventually Tarzan, this little baby Greystoke, is raised by apes essentially. And I really wanted to enjoy this book even in hindsight, because I do think that while this book was written in the early 1900s, the actual writing is very simple. It's not like that obnoxious 1900s writing that's like really hard and difficult to read. It's like actually understandable and you can follow a conversation and it doesn't go all over the place. Like I think the writing style, the style specifically in this book, is very good. The actual writing, not so great. Let me give you an example. So just for some context, Tarzan's parents were on a boat, right? Boat captain gets mutinied and the new captain is like, hey, we don't want some random English officials on our boat, so we're gonna leave you on this deserted island and then we're gonna tell the English government you're here, okay? So don't worry. And then Tarzan's parents are like, you're not gonna tell them that, right? So this conversation takes place as they're watching the ship they were on that was supposed to take them to their destination sail away, right? So John Greystoke, right, Tarzan's dad, he says this, I've been thinking that also, but we must face it as we must face whatever comes, bravely and with the utmost confidence in our ability to cope with circumstances, whatever they may be. Hundreds of years ago, our ancestors of the dim and distant past faced the same problems which we must face, possibly in these same primeval forests. That we are here today evidences their victory. What they did may we not do, and even better, for are we not armed with ages of superior knowledge, and have we not the means of protection, defense, and sustenance which science has given us, but of which they were totally ignorant? What they accomplished, Alice, with instruments and weapons of stone and bone, surely that may we accomplish also. And you read that and you're like, okay, he's kind of taking that in stride, all right? You and your pregnant wife are just marooned on an island for God knows how long, and you're kind of being real cool about it. Like, you think you got this. All right, that's you, big dog, that's you. But then his wife comes in, Alice Greystoke. She says, I wish that I might be a man with a man's philosophy, but I am but a woman, seeing with my heart rather than my head, and all that I can see is too horrible, too unthinkable to put into words. I can only hope you are right, John. I will do my best to be a brave primeval woman, a fit mate for the primeval man. Oh, if that isn't romance, and if that isn't feminist literature, I don't know what is. So even though I did DNF this book, I think I might still keep it because I do have fond memories of reading it when I was younger. But in the future, I might end up unhauling it or donating it somewhere, just because I'm probably not going to read this book again, even though I do have fond memories of it. But we'll get to that when the time comes. I'm not going to stress about Tarzan, you know? Side note, you know Tarzan's been to the moon twice. There's like 40 Tarzan books, and he's been to the moon twice, which is, I would argue, about 2 more times more than Tarzan needed to go to the moon. This was a book that I read for work called The 4 Disciplines of Execution by Chris McChenzie, Sean Covey, Jim Hewling, with Beverly Walker and Scott Thiel. Too many people. Like, it doesn't feel like 5 people wrote this book, you know? This book is all about using these 4 disciplines of execution to become leaders of leaders, to lead a business, to like whatever, to success, in that being whatever you define success as. And I had to read, I think, half of this for work, and we might end up reading the other half. We're not sure yet, but it's your typical like self-help book, but instead of it being for you, it's for like you as a leader and as a business. I only read half of this. We might end up reading the other half. We might not. It's fine, you know? So another book that I read in September is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you haven't seen my Trying to Relive the Past video, I will link it somewhere on screen now. I had so much fun making that video, and it's one of my favorite videos that I've made so far. This is like the ultimate classic. It is very short. It is an easy read. Whenever people want to like dip their toes into classic literature, like famous classic literature, I will always recommend Great Gatsby, biasly because it's my favorite classic, but also because it is so simple. Like, the messaging is there. If you want to look deep into a lot of things, you can look deep into a lot of things, but also like the message that the book is trying to get to you is also like pretty obvious throughout. And I loved making my trying to relive the past video, so if you haven't seen that, please watch it. And I definitely am very happy. I forgot what video I was supposed to make instead of the reliving the past video, but I started rereading this and I was like, I have to make a video about it. So I'm really happy I did that. I reread this book like once or twice a year. Like I said, it's a really simple read. So I hope that y'all, if you haven't read The Great Gatsby, can read it at some point in your future. And if you don't even want to read it, but if you want to get some general vibe, a general lowdown of what the book is about, watch my video about it. Another book I read and very much enjoyed was Circe by Madeline Miller. I believe I started reading this in August, but I might have finished it like early September. This book is so good. This is a classic retelling of the Circe story in Greek mythology. Circe is the daughter of the Greek titan Helios, who's the god of the sun. It comes out that Circe and a couple of her brothers and sisters can do magic, can do witchcraft, and the gods, they don't mess with that very much. So her dad talks to Zeus. Zeus sends him back, and her dad is like, yo, so this magic stuff, it ain't gonna fly. We don't really mess with that. So you're gonna get banished for all eternity to this island, right? And you're just gonna have to live with that. Which initially you're like, man, that's rough. But as you go through this book, you see kind of the kind of person Circe is, and you also see how her family and how just life is treating her when she's living with the gods. So while this is like a punishment, it's supposed to be a banishment, Circe's all for it. She's like, I have this beautiful island. I think it's called Aedes or something. She has this beautiful island surrounded by plants. She could practice her magic. She could do whatever she wants. And while it is still a punishment according to like the gods, she is living her true life, her true freedom. There's so much character development in this book. I think Madeline Miller did a great job of making us care about a character that, like, I have faint wisps of a memory of reading about when I was a kid, but this book definitely made me want to dive into like the Greek mythology and the history that we have of Circe, and not just this retelling. Madeline Miller is able to make Circe such like a character that you love at times, that you hate at times, and no matter how you feel about them, you want to see how their story ends, right? And I remember, I think I was maybe like 100 pages off from finishing this book, and I was like, let me read a couple pages before I go to sleep. And I end up falling asleep at 2 a.m. because the ending of this book was so good and it was so enjoyable. Similar to how Great Gatsby is a great, like, kind of a toe dip into classic literature, I think this is a great toe dip into like Greek mythology writing, which has exploded recently, especially with Madeline Miller's other book, Song of Achilles, which I've also heard very good things about. So hopefully I can read Song of Achilles pretty soon after this. It is such a wide, huge, a huge world of Greek mythology that Miller is able to put into this book in like an understandable and enjoyable way. There are parts of this book that are funny. There are parts of this book that are harrowing. There are parts of this book that are incredibly heroic, and parts of this book where you look at Circe and you're like, I don't like you as a person. And I think any writer that can make me feel that way about a fictional character has done a great job. So if you have a book, if you have a Libby subscription, if you can get your hands on Circe, I highly recommend it. Another high recommend is probably the greatest graphic novel of all time, Watchmen. I really do think it's the writing that carries this book, but also you just have some of the greatest artwork in early 2000s or late 90s history. Like, there is a lot of writing, right? And there is a lot of characters and stuff you have to keep track of and things like that. But I think the artwork does such a good job of not only moving the story along, but also helping tell the story, that even if you don't like reading a bunch, like, the artwork is going to get you through this. And this is like a few hundred pages. This is like this is almost 400 pages, if not a little bit more than 400 pages of comic book, right? Of graphic novel. So I very much think that even if you don't love reading, you will like Watchmen. And if you love reading and you haven't read this book, stop selling yourself short. Read this. Last but definitely not least is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Now, even though I gave this book 4 stars, it will always hold a special place in my heart, because with this book, I made my third places video, which a link will be popping up. If you haven't seen that, please go give it a look. And that's been like my favorite video, excuse me, that I've made to date. And this book is really interesting, right? So what starts out, the first maybe 20 pages of this book are police talking to a Jewish citizen of this town in the 70s, where they find a skeleton at the bottom of a well with a Jewish symbol on a necklace, right? So they go to the only Jewish person in town, which is this guy, and he doesn't give the cops like any real information, right? The story then rewinds 30 years. You're in the 40s in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and you're following the members of this Jewish and Black community as like this very almost small town story follows them, right? The little blurb they has like on the inside of the book jacket I think is really interesting. It says, in 1972, when workers in Pottstown, Pennsylvania were digging the foundations for a new housing development, the last thing they expected to uncover was a human skeleton. Who the skeleton was and how it got buried there were just two of the long-held secrets that had been kept for decades by the residents of Chicken Hill, the dilapidated neighborhood where immigrant Jews and African Americans lived side by side, sharing ambitions and sorrows. The part where it says living side by side and sharing ambitions and sorrows is what I really wanted to focus on, because I did give this book 4 stars, and when I was looking at what other people's reviews of the book was, I kind of shared a lot of my feelings in that while the writing of this book is very good, and the character development and the story that is being told primarily through these characters is really, really interesting, it does take a while to get into the story, right? And while I love having like a bunch of side plots and a bunch of characters, and especially with how James McBride's write, not only is this an easy read, but the characters, like, you can attach yourselves to them, right? Even if you don't like them, you can still attach yourself to these characters and follow their story. I think he did a great job at that. It just took it probably took this much of the book to get into like the story, not even to get into the story, let me rephrase that, to notice that a story is developing, right? And that was like a little bit too long for me. But once you get into like the very inklings of the beginning of the story, this is so interesting. You initially follow Moshe and Chona, who are these two Jewish immigrants to this town, who are husband and wife, who run the physical Heaven and Earth grocery store, right? And the Heaven and Earth grocery store, the physical location is important. Watch my last video if you want to learn more about that. But you really follow the relationships that not only Chona and Moshe have with each other, but also the relationships that they have with their Jewish and African American community in Chicken Hill. I think in my Third Places video, I said this was like a slice of life story, and I don't know if that's like the exact or like the right terminology, but I do think when you're following this like immigrant Jewish and Black community in this random town in 1940s America, there's a lot that could happen that can make this book very boring. But I think the way that James McBride writes these characters and is able to craft a story, even though it takes a while to get into, the way he's able to craft a story is so fun and just like so entertaining. And maybe entertaining isn't the right word, or fun isn't the right word, because there's a lot of tragic things that happen in this book. I do think that just being able to follow even the crumbs of a storyline in the very beginning is so cool and so fun for me that, like, again, similar to Cersei, like, I was up late finishing the last, 50 to 100 pages of this book because the story was so good, right? This book came out in 2023. Yeah, this book came out in 2023. And I truly think like this has like all the bits and pieces to be a modern classic. Like I think this book could be used to teach about like hatred and bigotry and white America and the struggle that like any immigrant, but specifically in this book, Jewish immigrants and African Americans dealt with in 1940s America. Like I think James McBride does a very good job of crafting a story that not only is so intensely focused on these few characters in this small town, but also is able to, like, for lack of a better term, like interact with real history and real things that were happening in this time. And I'm sure like real history might be a bad term for it, because I'm sure like there are a bunch of stories really similar to what the characters of the Heaven and Earth grocery store go through in real life. But being able to to craft this story with the actual history that was happening at the time, I think was a very tall task, and something that I think James McBride did very well. So if you have the opportunity at any point in time this year, at any point in your life, to read the Heaven and Earth grocery store, I highly recommend it. Third thing we're going to talk about in this video as we finish the books that I read in August and September are the books that I'm going to read in October. Now that I'm moved in and everything's settled and all that, I can kind of focus more on not just making videos, but also reading the books that I'm making these videos about. One of the books that has been on the back burner for a long time is 100 Years of Solitude. I'm not going to talk about this too much. I think I've referenced it in both my August and my September TBR because I've wanted to read this so badly. It got to the point where like my roommate started reading this before I did. So I think I'm going to steal this bag, and it's probably the book that I'm going to prioritize the most this month because I've been kind of delaying reading it for so long. And I think one of the things that has caused me to kind of not prioritize this book, earlier is that I've heard it can be kind of a complicated read. There are a lot of characters, a lot of them have similar names, and there's a bunch of like jumping back and forth in the timeline of the book. So while I understand that can be kind of complicated, I really do want to prioritize this and kind of put all of my focus into reading this book. I've only heard good things about Garcia Marquez as an author, and I've also heard that he started his career when it came to writing as a journalist, and I've always loved like a journalistic style of writing. So I'm hoping to hop into this honestly when I'm done editing this video. So 100 Years of Solitude, you're definitely getting read this month. One book that I started reading this month is Sherlock Holmes, Complete Novels and Stories. I've talked about this in previous videos like I have with most of this stuff here. I'm about 30 pages into A Study in Scarlet, which is the first and one of the most famous like OG Sherlock Holmes stories. And I think one of the cool things about this is like I was super obsessed with Sherlock Holmes in middle school, and while I have read these stories, I just don't remember a lot of it. So it's like I'm reading these mysteries for the first time, which is really, really fun. So I think I am going to kind of put this on the back burner for the majority of the month, just so I can get through 100 Years of Solitude with like my full attention. But once I'm done with 100 Years, I'm definitely going to hop back into this because I do love Arthur Conan Doyle's style of writing, and I want to hop back into it. I love this in middle school. I want to get back into this, definitely. I have been reading a lot of fiction lately, which I think after 75 Hard, I kind of wanted to go heavy on fiction because I had to read so much nonfiction. But I wanted, to include a nonfiction book this month, just so I have something to like hop back and forth with. And the book we're going with this month is The Anatomy of Violence, The Biological Roots of Crime by Adrian Raine. I've heard good things about this book, and I've heard bad things about this book. And I kind of want to come to some of at least my own conclusions when it comes to what the author is talking about, but I also just love the psychological aspects of like nature versus nurture. I mean, I was a psych major, for God's sakes, right? I think I got this book in like a 2-for-1 at Barnes & Noble with the next book that we're going to be talking about, and I think I gave it like 20 or 30 pages before I just put it on my shelf. Not even for like a DNF, I just wanted to read something else. But I want to hop back into this. Like I've said, I've heard mixed things, specifically relating to some of the conclusions that the author comes to. So I want to see kind of the conclusions that the author comes from, and also if those conclusions differ from the conclusions I come from after reading the information that he's talking about, and then maybe doing my own little research on the side. Like I said, like if I was ever going to use my degree for anything, it'd be like as like a psychology researcher, So these types of books are really interesting to me. Nurture versus nature is really interesting to me. And so I hope that this book is at least, maybe not entertaining, maybe that's not the right word when we're talking about roots of crime, but I hope this is like an engaging book to read to where like I actually finish it. Like I said, I already tried to read it once and it didn't work out. So hopefully I can read it a second time and actually finish it. And the last book that I want to read in October, look, I got influenced. I'm easily influenced. Shout out Jack Edwards. I love his videos. He talked about this book, If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is not a book I would ever read on my own, but I know Jack Edwards talked about it. I know a couple other people on booktube that I follow and whose opinion I value. They also talked about it. I'll read the blurb on the back here. On the day that Oliver Marks is released from jail, the man who put him there is waiting. Detective Colborn wants to know the truth, and after 10 years, Oliver is ready to tell it. A decade ago, Oliver is one of 7 young Shakespearean actors at Delachaux Classical Conservatory, a place of keen ambition and fierce competition. In this secluded world of firelight and leather-bound books, Oliver and his friends play the same roles on stage and off: hero, villain, tyrant, temptress, ingenue, extra. In their fourth and final year, good-natured rivalries turn ugly, and on opening night, real violence invades the students' world of make-believe. In the morning, the fourth years find themselves facing their own tragedy and their greatest acting challenge yet, convincing the police, each other, and themselves that they are innocent. So from what I understand, this book is like a retelling of a bunch of Shakespeare plays, if that makes sense. And I read a little bit of Shakespeare like in high school and in college and things like that, but none of it really stuck to me. Like, I can recognize that a lot of classic Shakespeare is very good writing, but it's never like attracted me in any way. And also, one of the reasons that I started this YouTube channel in the first place was like I wanted to expose myself to different styles of writing, different genres of book that I wouldn't normally read. And this is definitely a genre of book that I probably wouldn't have read 3 months ago before I started this channel, right? So I'm very excited to read this. I might wait until after 100 Years of Solitude to read this, just so I can get 100 years out of the way. I am very excited to read this. I'm excited to delve into a book that it seems like the main themes are like both friendship and rivalries and trusting, and to kind of have all of that on the backdrop of Shakespeare and of theater, I think is going to be really interesting and really cool. So If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, one of the books I'm going to be reading in October. And as we finish off this video, first and foremost, I want to say thank you. My last video on third places in the Heaven and Earth grocery store is on track to be my most viewed video. I think it's at like 85 or 86 views, and my booktube newbie tag video has I think like 88. So it's on track to be my most viewed video, and I want to thank y'all for that. It was the first time that I posted on like my social media that I was doing this, that I was making these videos, and a bunch of people, a bunch of my homies and family showed out. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for watching. I took so long to kind of like post about what I was doing, not even because I was embarrassed about it. Like, I love making these videos, but I hate when someone tells you, oh, I'm doing this thing, and then they send you to like a YouTube channel or a Spotify that has zero music, or hey, I'm releasing this YouTube video in 6 months, subscribe to me. Like that's always been like kind of weird to me. So I wanted to make sure that before I started like blasting out the fact that I'm making these videos, that there was like something that people would come to, and even if they don't like the video I just posted, they could go back a few weeks and find a video that they did like. If anything that I talked about in this video interested you, or you liked what I was talking about, please leave a like on this video. But if you have anything you want to say about the books that we talked about today, or if you have, oh my god, if you have any recommendations on books that I can read in future months, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love a comment. And if you like anything at all about what I'm talking about, if you like this video, if you like any other videos you got recommended, please subscribe. There's a button down below. It helps me out a lot, and it gives me like kind of advice, like, hey, what you're doing works, keep doing it. So if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe. Any and all engagement that y'all give me, I think is super duper helpful. Also down below is my Instagram if you want to follow me there. There's my email if you want to email me. And I don't know, man, like, I'm thirsty. Make sure you're drinking water. I got my water back here. I didn't want it in the video. And like, do something that makes you happy today, man. Like, look, I got an automatic M&M thing. Like, life is good, right? Life is good. But with all that said, I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll catch y'all next week. Peace.